Hi, I'm the Warrior Witch, and you can call me Nike. Has anybody else been struggling with like weird spots of acne because of wearing masks all the time now? Or is that just me? I feel like it's always the corner of my mouth and like sometimes the bottom of my chin where the mask will sit and the top. Yeah, it's annoying. And I have some exciting news at the end of the video, so make sure you stick around for the full thing to hear my exciting news. But anyway, today we're talking about Candle Magic 101. Now, I won't be talking so much about how to read a candle spell, but more about just the basics of doing one. So, especially for novices, and especially on social media right now like TikTok and Instagram, you might be more familiar with things like jar spells, but my personal favorite way to do spell work is candle spells. This has a long history in a lot of different cultures, and we even still see remnants of it today in Catholicism with like lighting candles to implore the saints to help you out. So it's definitely not specific to one tradition, but in witchcraft, it tends to be kind of all over the place. And there's a lot of different ways you can do it. So I'm just gonna walk you through a few of the ways that I know for me personally, that I like to do. As always, there's no one way to do magic, so do you. Candles can be somewhat low-key, but when you start really getting into the nitty-gritty bits and making it look a little bit less normal, it's a little less conspicuous, but you know, just like with anything, there are ways to hide it. But I'm just gonna talk about the more open ways, and I'll mention throughout the video ways that you could make it more low-key and less obvious if you need to, but my spell work's gonna be pretty open and obvious, so that's the way that I'm gonna talk about. So the first question that a lot of people ask is, does the size of the candle matter? And my answer is, kind of. It really depends more on what your intention is and how big you need the spell work to be, how strong you need it to be. So I think of it like trying to move a car, right? Like if there's no keys in it and you need to lift it. A very, very strong man could take care of it all on his own. It might be a struggle still, but you know, we've seen those videos of dudes pulling cars with ropes. Or you could get like 50 people together and just hoist it and move it together. If you need a big job, you either need a big person, a big strong person, or a bunch of smaller people. So I would say if you need a bigger job done, you can do a larger candle. I know you'll probably see online if you start looking at candle work, you'll see one larger candle in the center and then a bunch of little candles around it, or sometimes it's a bunch of little candles. It really all depends on the personal preference, obviously, but one of the really, really common things you'll see is going to be 7-day glass candles. I use them a lot. This is actually specifically one of my deities candles, but it's the exact same type of candle that I use for my spell work, for some of it. So for glass candles, whether they are straight in the container or if they are a pull-out, which is you'd have the glass separate from the candle, so you would be able to pop a candle inside that would fit. These generally have to be anointed and treated a little bit differently than freestanding candles would, because obviously with this I have access to the wax directly, but with this I really only have access to the top. If you have a pull-out candle, it's a lot easier and you can just take the candle out and do whatever you would do on other freestanding candles, but with glass candles specifically, I write straight on the glass. When it comes to herbs, I actually will set this in the middle of a larger dish and set the herbs around it. And if the dish is big enough, I might even have candles set around it too. So this candle would go in the center here, and then I might place like smaller chime candles on the outside, or maybe outside of this container, I might have tea lights set up around it. It really just depends on personal preference. So the easiest, most fire-safe way to use candles is going to be adding sigils to help put in your intent to that spell. If you have a freestanding candle like this one, you could either carve it onto the candle itself, you could set it underneath, or if you have good eyes and a delicate hand, if it's big enough on the bottom, you could carve a sigil here. But generally I like to do it on the sides or doing the set on top method. I'll also sometimes write a word down the side or around it. I'll use symbols, like if I need communication, I'll put the symbol for Mercury. If I need love, I'll add a heart, or I may add specific words or more symbols to add to it, in which case I might just do a full-on sigil based on that anyway. But if you need like your sigil down here and then a heart up here, you could do that as well. For any candle that is going to be in glass, you can actually see here that I have 2 keys, which are one of her symbols. So I use these to mark that this is her candle. And it would be much the same with any regular candle work. So I might put it on the bottom, which would be the easiest way for you to hide something if you need it to be more inconspicuous. Otherwise, because I'm able to do this stuff out in the open. I'll also write it down the side. I might write words or a name, or I might add other symbols like we talked about if we were adding in love. I could draw a heart here. I can add a lot of different things. So writing straight on the jar works perfectly fine. If you're very careful, with a glass candle like this, you could use a skewer of some type, maybe even a thick needle, and you could poke into the wax in the top and you could push in some of the herbs. Just keep in mind that it may burn differently if any of those herbs are left on top or happen to catch when it is lit. The other option is, instead of putting it inside the candle itself, if you have it placed on a plate of some sort, something that it can set on top of and then more things can go around, you can actually put the herbs around the candle instead. So if we're using this plate again, so you'd set the candle on top here, and then you put the herbs on the dish here. The same can go with freestanding candles. You can stick it to the glass or whatever plate that you're using, and then you could put the herbs all around it because you've got all that space. With smaller candles or freestanding candles like this, you can anoint them with an oil and then roll it in your herbal mixture, but once again, those herbs and even the oil, depending on what you're using, might catch. So you do need to be aware that if you are watching the flame for any signs, if you have herbs or oils directly on your candle, it's going to change the way it burns. So if you happen to have like peppermint oil put on it, please don't do that. Peppermint oil is very flammable. But if you happen to have some sort of oil on it, especially essential oils, the oil may catch, and then if your whole candle is on fire, don't take that as a sign that it's highly energetic or that something's going wrong. It's just that the oil that is on the physical candle has caught on fire. So just keep that in mind. It's a factor to consider for if you plan to do spell work in that specific way. So for anointing candles, it's a pretty simple process. For freestanding ones, once again, for your typical glass candle, it's gonna be a little bit different. You might do the bottom of it, you might do the rim up here, you might add a little bit onto the wax itself on the inside, but again, if it catches, it's going to look a little different. You could add it to the plate around it, same thing as the herbs. But for a freestanding candle like this, the general way, just like we talked about in my last video with tag locks and writing petitions, in to bring in, out to bring out. So if you're anointing it, and I had the oil on my hands. I don't have any right now because I'm not using this for spell work right now. But if I was going to be anointing this and I had the oil on my hands, out, so you'd pull up from the base outwards, so outwards from the top. Or if you wanted to draw in, so if you want to do like a money drawing spell, from the top down to the bottom, make sure you get the whole thing coated. Your hands will get pretty messy. You could even put it on a separate plate and maybe roll it in that. If it's a good flat plate, so you're not soaking it, you're just getting a thin layer on it, and then you could transfer it to where your herbs are and then roll it in that. Some people like to take the herbs in their hand and then press it, but I find that pretty difficult, so I tend to do anointing with my hands and then rolling into the herbs myself. And this is after I've done any carving on it, so the carving would go first, and then the oil, and then the herbs. So I've shown off my prosperity oil in different videos before here and there, but my oil's base is olive oil, so this isn't really all that flammable, so I don't have to worry about it too much when I'm doing spell work. I just have to make sure that I'm not drowning out the wick, depending on what I'm doing, especially in glass candles. I try not to use oil in glass candles so much just because it can drown out the wick a little easier, and then it's not that the spell has gone bad, it's that you added too much. So just be careful with that, but this for me has always been a good safe option, and if I need to anoint anything, I do a thin layer more than a thick layer. So let's talk about actually burning these candles. So now keep in mind, I don't have every kind of candle here with me, but I do have a lot. So we'll go through each of the types on their own. Easiest and arguably cheapest is going to be tea lights. So tea lights, I have them, they come in like packs of 50 or 100. At the dollar store, you get colored packs of like 6 or 8 or something like that for obviously $1. But you can get pretty big packs for very little money. So if you are tight on cash and doing witchcraft on a budget, tea lights are a great way to go. Just know that you may be using more because they are much smaller candles. You can pull them out from this container if you're very careful. Some of them can be a little bit stubborn, but you could also write stuff on the bottom. You could add herbs to the top if you're very careful and very light-handed. So don't do too many because, again, it could catch and then it'll burn funny or it might drown out the wick. Temperance Alden has actually made a point of saying that if you use cinnamon and you have it around the wick, it could just make it so that it burns improperly. So just be careful and you know, if you can safely, please look into fire safety first. try to understand and do maybe like little tests of non-spell candles and just see how it burns with different herbs that are on it in a very controlled environment where you are watching it the whole time, so that you can know what it looks like without intention versus with intention. And obviously these come in colors too, so if you want to do color correspondences, you can do that as well. Or if you want to put it on small plates or put them all together on a bigger plate, you can put the herbs around them instead. It's a great option. Yes, these old chime candles are in a pickle jar. Don't judge me, use what you have. So the next type I have is chime candles. Now these are really, really little. And the one that I have here specifically, this set I got on Amazon, I think it was like 100 or 50 for like 10 bucks. It's cheap, but they're cheap. So they're not exactly like the greatest option. The color quality on them isn't all that great, and they burn all right. Like, they have worked for me just fine with spell work, but they're really, really small. I can't carve on them super easily, and since they're not big, it's hard to get them to fit into any sort of holder. So I always have to melt the bottom and then stick it to whatever I'm doing, and I have to watch it very carefully because even then, they don't really drip all that much, so there's not any excess wax to keep it on there, which can be nice. It's nice not to have so many wax remnants, but at the same time, it does make it more unstable. But chime candles work great. It's easy to put a bunch of them into a small space without having to worry too much about how big, like physically big, the spell work is getting. So they're a great option for like adding little bits to it, but I wouldn't necessarily make one single small chime candle be your main spellwork candle if you can avoid it. I would even say maybe like a tea light would be better as your main candle, and these would be the outer candles. I do have a second kind of chime candle that obviously I showed off earlier, I'm really excited about. It's literally double the size of the smaller one. So this one's a lot thicker, there's a lot more room for me to be able to carve anything into it to add more symbols. I would argue, if I'm careful, I could put a simple sigil on the bottom of this so that I could add a little bit more of that. So that's really great. I'm excited for these. But again, they're still not all that big, so I might not have just one. It could be my main one if I'm doing a slightly smaller spell, so I could have this one as the main candle and maybe some chimes around it. But I generally don't want this to be for any larger workings just on its own. But they are great, they burn really well. About 4 hours. They're called Wicca Wicks, if I didn't say that before. But I've really enjoyed using them so far. They're great. Obviously we went over 7-day glass candles before. This one's from the dollar store, so the quality is a little bit lower, meaning that it doesn't quite burn the same as other candles, so just keep that in mind. Cheaper supplies work fine, but the actual physical burning is gonna look a little bit different depending on the quality of the wick and the wax and the candle. So just keep that in mind when you're shopping. Sometimes spending a couple bucks, if you have them, is worth it. Spending more money but getting 1 or 2 fewer candles to have higher quality candles that you do buy is worth it in my opinion. Then there's also taper candles. I really like these, and I would and have used these as my main component for spell work in the past. Freestanding candles are going to burn a little bit differently, but this has plenty of room to write down the side. It has a bigger base even than those big chime candles I have. Actually, the base is the same size as the bigger chime candle that I have, so I know that there's enough room to write on both of them. And there are holders that are specifically designed for taper candles. Just know that these tend to melt and drip a little bit more than others, so you'll just want to keep an eye on it and make sure you have a large enough plate or container for it to drip around. And that's why some of those holders are built the way that they are and shaped the way that they are. It's so that the wax drippings can be caught. And finally, of the ones I have here in my house, I have this really thick pillar candle. It does have pine cones and like evergreen stuff in it, so I don't plan to use this for spell work necessarily. I don't even know if I'll ever burn it. I want to because I'm curious, but I don't know. But this, obviously, because it has this stuff in it, it's gonna burn a little bit differently, but without the stuff in it, they sell plain ones like this at Walmart and, you know, a bunch of places that they sell candles. But I mean, they're big, they're really big, so you could fit a lot of information down here. You could even, if you are able to copy it down well, you could probably put somebody's natal chart here, or the natal chart of an event, which would be cool. You could write names and birth dates, you could write a lot of information, big, complicated sigils. Down the side, there's a lot of room. I mean, think of how much you could fit on a giant candle like this. They have bigger ones that are a little bit taller. This is about as thick as they usually get, but I mean, it's pretty big. They make them a little bit smaller, a little bit less like wide around, and they have them a lot smaller like in stature in general. I think they're called votive candles. So they're sort of like a mini version of this, and they also work really, really well. Again, depending on the size and depending on the size of the working that you need, all of your needs will make what you use work differently. So I won't go over what everything means for reading, but I'll talk about the factors to consider when reading candles, and a lot of this is just trial and error and doing enough of it to figure out the signs and what they mean for you. Anyway, a lot of candle work is doing enough of it to know what the signs mean to you, but there are guides out there. I will link actually my favorite way to read 7-day glass candles in the description below. So if you want to watch that video, it's a great explanation for it, but how you read each one's going to be different, and freestanding candles are going to read really differently from glass candles. So I'll talk about first the stuff that is similar. So there's going to be how the flame reacts while it's burning. So like a high flame versus a low flame if the flame splits in two. If it happens to go out and you can't relight it, or if it refuses to go out when you're trying to snuff it. So this is why we take notes. So try to have a place where you mark down not only what the spell is and what your ingredients are and what the timing is, but also any notes that happen during and after the spell, which is what I like to do. So I'll start with the intention, and then I'll go to timing. So like if it's a full moon in Aries like we just had, I'll write that down. If it's a new moon, if it's a waxing crescent, a waning crescent, whatever it may be, a day of the week that may correspond with my intention. So like Thursday is Jupiter's day, so it could be for prosperity and financial workings. If it is a certain planetary hour, that would be important too. If you care enough to incorporate it, you don't have to, it's just a factor that you could do. And then I go to the ingredients, including not just the herbs and the oils, but also the type of candle I'm using, any color correspondences I'm using, if I'm adding a petition, literally anything that is part of this spell goes into my ingredients list because they're each an ingredient to me. And then after that, I will have on the other side of the page, usually I'll have notes. So notes during and then notes after. I even have the Polaroid zip, which again, I mentioned in my last video. I'll take pictures of it sometimes, especially afterwards, just because it's easier to get like lighting in the way that I need without having to worry about it during the spell work. But I'll take pictures and I'll stick those in there because it's a great like physical reference to know what I'm looking at rather than writing generally about what it looks like. Sometimes it's just easier to have the visual with it. If you're good at drawing, you could also draw it. The next thing to consider is going to vary depending on how you are reading it and what the kind of candle is. So the shape of the wax. Now the shape of the wax for freestanding candles is going to mean something very, very differently from the shape of the wax for a glass candle. For a freestanding candle, it's going to be how it drips during the spell and how the drippings look after the spell is all burned out and completed, how it's run down wherever it's standing on, which again, means that you need to have a larger space because sometimes it comes out really big. So I like to burn them on larger plates if I can. Versus a glass candle, there's rings that may form along the glass. There is how much wax is left at the bottom, where the wax is, front, back, left, or right, and the actual like shapes that may form both on the glass I've had and at the bottom. Sometimes there are shapes. Now with chime candles, I've had these burn differently and give me different results depending on what surface I'm burning them on. Typically, I try to burn them in a smaller holder like this, which has a little divot on the inside where these slot in really nicely. The big ones fit nice. The smaller ones don't really. Don't mind me. It moves around a lot in that space, so I really try to watch it if I put the little ones in here, but it burns very differently than if I have it stuck to a plate. So when it's freestanding like this, I will look at how the wax pools on the bottom at the very end, but usually the wick disappears pretty completely, so I don't have to worry about that so much. But in this holder, because the way it burns is really differently, I won't so much have wax left over as I will have the wick left over. So I've had a spell before where it formed a letter of someone's name, which was a good sign. I've had it form an infinity symbol and had curled just completely in on itself, which was very cool. I didn't expect that. So paying attention to the wick is also going to be important for the freestanding candles, but make sure you understand that it's going to depend on how you do them, which is why it's important to get a couple of these under your belt. Now this one you'll only have with the glass candles, but there's also whatever kinds of residue is on the side, and I mean like on the inside. So if there is soot or smoke, or if there is like on the full inside of the ring, if there's like a wax residue the full way. Again, this is also going to depend on your candle quality. These $1 ones have a tendency to be a little bit more hazy than better quality ones just because that's how it goes. Pretty much every one I've had has been at least a little bit hazy. So if you're getting these dollar store ones, don't worry so much. You can even see it on here. Like it's a little bit hazy going the full way up. It's just how the cheap wax burns. So doing a lot of these and doing them without intention will help you understand how the actual candle on its own as a physical item just plain burns. And that's about the long and short of it. Other than that, you just have to do them, let them burn, take your notes, and look back at previous spell work you've done, taking note of how it went versus how the signs looked. Oh, one last note. So before I actually light the candles and do spell work, I usually do a tarot card pull. Sorry, future me, I love you. Please be patient. So I'll give actually 2 examples of stuff that I've had happen recently. So I was doing a money draw spell and I got the Queen of Pentacles. With this card, it's a really good sign because the Queen of Pentacles is related to money and financial independence. So for a money spell, for that to be the divination that comes up beforehand, it's a good sign that this is what I'm supposed to be doing and that it's gonna go well. I've done another spell where I drew the Temperance card. If I draw Temperance, it might mean that either it's going to take a little longer than I want, or I just need to be patient and the full results will come to me, or I just need to not worry about it so much and just let it take its course and it'll come in its own time. So it gives me good warning ahead of time of what I can expect from this spell work. Now, if it is what would be considered a negative card, like if you're doing a love spell and you pull the 3 of Swords, it may indicate something. In that particular case, it may indicate you need to do some more shadow work. If it is a not now kind of card, it may mean that you need to do the spell on a different day, or you might need to do a clarification card on why not now, or what other things may need to be added in. It may also change the way I word my spell. So when I put some of the intentions in, I may change how I word it. I may change what I do around it. I may change out some of the herbs. So doing divination has definitely been a big help for me in my spell work, which is another thing that I'll record down in the notes. And it's always interesting, especially if I didn't have experience with it like I didn't early on, looking at a spell that I did, looking at the results that it had, and then looking at the cards that I pulled and seeing how they played out. Even if you don't change anything, just looking at how the results matched up with the cards, or if the advice they were giving you would have helped that be better. It's always a good thing to note and to just keep track of for the future. It's how you learn. I'm just gonna make a note here. What was it? Oh, don't mind me, it's the ADHD kicking in. You can watch it in person. Yes, I got it, it's fine. So if you draw a card that is giving you some advice, it might not be about changing the spell itself, but it may be about changing the mundane action. So if you pull certain cards that are telling you to go a different direction with a job spell, maybe you apply to a different place, or maybe you wait on applying to the place you're looking at now because another place you had applied to before is gonna call you. So Temperance in that case might be just give it a couple days longer, do this spell, but wait. You know, or if it's like, hurry it up, 8 of Wands, like, go at it, don't wait this week, do it today. Send in that application today, not tomorrow. Or call the job back today, not next week. So the mundane actions may also be what it is advising you of. So yeah, that's about the long and short of it. Everyone's gonna have little tips and tricks that they do to make their spell work their own. There may be things that they add in that I don't do, or stuff that they don't do that I do. Spell work's gonna be different for everybody, so just play around, see what works, don't be afraid. I hear a lot of people saying that they are afraid to jump into spell work because they don't want to mess it up, or they don't want to get hurt, or they don't want to, you know, whatever it is, whatever they're trying to avoid. The best advice I can give you is there's a reason that we stress the basics, and we stress the basics so that you can do things, so that you can do spell work safely. So you do your protections, you cleanse all your items, and then you do the spell work. You have those basics at hand so that you're able to do this stuff and you're able to not worry as much. You're able to just relax and say, I cleansed, I protected, I've done all the basics that I need to do, so now I can do this spell work without fear. And it's also why you record the results. Most stuff is not going to be catastrophic. Most stuff is gonna be fine. Even if it goes poorly, it's gonna be fine, I promise. So just know that the only way that you can really start to get the experience you want is to do it. You need the practical experience, not just the book experience. So if you guys want to do this, I encourage you to go for it. Money spells, self-love spells, motivation spells, those are great ones to start with. And that's all I've got for you guys this week. If you want to show off any of your candle spells, or maybe your money bowl like we did in my other video, you can show that off at Warrior Witch Coven, the hashtag. If you wanna tag me, you can tag me at The Warrior Witch. You can find more of my videos here on my channel. You can find me at Instagram and TikTok under Warrior Witch Nike, or Twitter at Warrior Witch N, because they don't let you have long enough names for my full name to be in there. And most exciting, I just published my blog! Oh, I'm so excited! So if you guys want to read more of my opinions, they're going to be smaller pieces. Some of them may be transcriptions of videos. I did that for my Money Bowl, so if you want a transcription of the Money Bowl, you can do that. But I'll put the link right here. Ooh, wow, how lovely. So if you want to go to my blog, you can look at it at that link. I'll also link it below because that's exciting. Ooh, I've dreamed about having a website for a long time, and I never used to consider myself a writer, but I'm really enjoying it. I don't know if it'll be like a weekly thing. I'll try to do maybe weekly if I can. We'll see how that works out. Let me know what you guys think, and blessed be.